Kevin Delaney here, coming to you today from the beach in Santa Monica. I want to talk to you today about what I call the 3 Ds of dissociation. Dissociation, and also then contrasting dissociation with association. These are very significant psychological concepts. They're mental, emotional concepts. And let me just say at the outset, neither dissociation nor association is good or bad. Both, in fact, have their use. They're both of benefit at times, and they can also be problematic at times. Let me also just say that anytime we're talking about mental, emotional, psychological phenomena, we're always talking about another D, degree. I want you always to keep that in mind. We're always talking about degree. So if we talk about a person being mentally, emotionally associated versus dissociated, understand we're always talking about a spectrum here. It's not 100% 1 or 0. It's always, there's a gradient, there's a spectrum. So what is dissociation? Well, let me give you my 3 Ds to explain dissociation. I'm going to give you an example too of all of this. I was talking the other day about my first experience taking a yoga class. So I'm going to use that as an example. Let's say now you have somebody who has never taken a yoga class in their life, and a friend says, "Hey, I'm going to this yoga class. You should come with me." And the person thinks to themselves, I don't know, I feel like that's not really me, This is the first D of dissociation, what I call disidentification. I feel like that's just not me. I'm not the kind of person who goes to a yoga class. I don't really do that kind of thing. It's not me. Disidentification means literally that you are rejecting a certain identity for yourself. You're saying, no, that's not me. That's not who I am. I'm not the kind of person who does that. So that's the first D, disidentification. The second D then is what I call detachment. And detachment, again, we're talking in an emotional sense here largely. The person feels emotionally detached from it. So hearing their friend talk about the yoga class, even though their friend might be very enthusiastic about it, very excited about it, they really are not very moved by it. There's a kind of an emotional detachment. They don't feel emotionally connected to it. They don't feel emotionally involved with it. There's a kind of detachment. They don't hate it. That would actually be a kind of emotional involvement. They're just kind of indifferent to it. So there's a detachment there. That's the second D, detachment. So we have disidentification. Second D is detachment. And then the third D is distance. The person feels as though there's a certain distance between themselves and whatever it is that we're talking about here, in this case, the yoga class. They know that yoga classes exist in the world. They know that people do this, but it seems kind of distant to them. It seems kind of remote. It's not something that they certainly don't go to yoga classes. They don't put themselves right in the midst of the yoga class. Even though there might be a yoga class taking place down the street, it might as well be 1,000 miles away as far as they're concerned. It seems very remote and very distant to them. So those are the 3 Ds: disidentification, detachment, and distance. Now, suppose the friend really kind of, insisted, and the other person said, well, I want to see my friend. I want to spend time with my friend. So what the hell? I'll just go along. Maybe, I know that they really want to do it. So whatever, I'll just go along and do it anyway. But I'm not expecting to like it. Lo and behold, they get there and they start to get into it, and they start to find that they really like it. They really enjoy this. And it's not to say that it happens instantly, but over time, they start to associate themselves with this experience. They start to become more and more associated with it. So what are we experiencing now? We're experiencing the opposite of everything that we talked about. Before, we talked about disidentification. What's the opposite of disidentification? Identification. They're identifying more as, yeah, I am the kind of person who can take a yoga class. Yes, I am the sort of person who can do this and can enjoy this. I never thought that I could. I never saw myself ever doing this, taking a yoga class like this. But now I do see myself in that way. They've actually changed, in a sense, their perception of themselves. We talked a moment ago about detachment, feeling emotionally detached from something. Now again, we have the opposite of it. They don't feel detached. They feel like, I really like this. I really enjoy this. There's more of a feeling of emotional involvement, and more of an emotional connection, as opposed to being indifferent toward it. And then the third thing, distance, that we talked about, now it's the opposite. They feel much closer to the subject, you might say, of yoga. Maybe they buy some books on yoga. Maybe they go to the class, repeatedly now, and they feel much closer to the whole kind of world of yoga. They feel like, this is my world. Yes, I feel much closer to it. Before it seemed like something kind of weird and something that those other people did, and now it feels much closer to me. So it's like the gap has really, really shortened. It feels like I'm closer to it. So again, those are the 3 Ds, and we can look at them in both ways. We can look at them in terms of dissociation, but then their opposites, we can also see the experience of association. Now, as always, what is the significance of this, or the relevance of this? Well, it has a lot of relevance in a number of ways, one of which is persuasion and motivation. It's very, very hard to get motivated to do something if you feel completely disengaged from it. There's another D, you might say. I didn't include that one, but that's kind of another way of thinking of dissociation. It's you're not engaged with it. You don't identify with it, and especially again when people are saying, "Oh, that's not me." Think of somebody, let's say, who is looking to buy a car. Incidentally, I'm not saying that all 3 of these are always present to the same degree. You could have, for example, somebody who sees a car and they say, wow, look at that car. That car is amazing. Wow, like, I love that car. There's just one problem. I can't really see myself driving that car. So I love it from a distance, you might say. I love it seeing it parked there in the showroom, but I don't believe that I could ever be driving that car. So again, you're disidentifying with that car, and salespeople know this. That's why they want to get people in the car, because they want them to be able to envision themselves owning this car, driving this car. This is absolutely essential if somebody's buying a house. You have to be able to walk into that house and feel like, I'm home. This is my house. I can absolutely see myself. I can see my family living here. I can see this being our house. This is our neighborhood. This is our living room, etc. Very, very hard to sell somebody a house if they don't feel like this is potentially my house. Again, they feel detached. They don't hate the house. They just are not particularly emotionally moved by it, or the thought of owning the house doesn't really excite them at all. And then distance. It's like, well, again, it's a nice house for somebody else, maybe. It feels like somebody else's house. It doesn't feel like my house, so there's that distance between me and it. I talked recently about a woman on one of the social media sites who posted a picture of her 2 very young children at the local library. And they were looking at a book together, and they were, you could tell they were really, really into it. And what she posted along with the photo was the statement, my kids never want to go to the library, and yet when we're there, they don't want to leave. Somebody posted a comment too about some cousins of hers who, it's the same way with taking a bath. I've heard other parents say this. They say, my child, it's like the child has multiple personalities. They kick and scream and beg don't make me take a bath. No, please, no, not a bath. Oh God, no. And then once they're in the bath, they're having a great time. What I recommended to this woman who posted the photo of her children at the library is, the next time you want to go to the library, first of all, don't say anything about going to the library. Show them the photo. Say, hey, look at this photo I found here on my phone. Hey, that's you guys, isn't it? Show them the photo, let them see the photo, and then ask them, what's going on here? What is it that you're looking at? And let them tell you. Notice, by the way, the tense, present tense. Not what were you looking at, but what are you looking at? And I said, get them to see themselves in the photo. This is, again, how you motivate somebody. You know that once they're there at the library, they're going to love it. The problem is they're not at the library now, and the library, in a sense, it seems rather distant. Yes, we were at the library last week, but that might as well have been a million years ago in the mind of a young child. It's not a current event. So there's that time distance. It seems like something we did a long time ago. Maybe even the library building seems very remote, even though it might be, 6 blocks away. Just as an aside, it's interesting how our language oftentimes emphasizes the wrong thing. So when you say to a young child, do you want to go to the library? You're emphasizing the journey from the house to the library. Go to the library. And the child might think, well, I don't really want that. You're talking about getting in the car and driving somewhere. That's not what you sell them on. You don't sell them on going to the library. You sell them on being at the library. It's like when people ask me, they say, do you like to travel? And I say, no, I don't particularly like to travel. I love seeing new places and exploring new cities, but travel per se, when you say travel, at least in my mind, that conjures up airports and airplanes and sitting in traffic and whatnot. So you have to be careful oftentimes how you word something like that. But what you want to do now, if you're trying to, so to speak, sell the kids on going to the library, is get them to see themselves at the library, get them to experience it now in their minds as a current event. And then they may very well say to you, hey, can we go to the library? Because you've now conjured up all those good feelings that they associate with the library, but which a moment ago, it all just seemed kind of very remote and very distant. So it's very important in terms of persuasion and also motivating yourself. I've talked about this before. A lot of people, they'll say, oh, I know I really need to exercise. I need to get out and exercise. I know I should. I know it's really important. And then maybe they just kind of push themselves or throw themselves into it. And before too long, they find that they're really enjoying exercise. And it's almost like, why did I think that this was some dreadful, horrible chore? I love this. And the problem is, again, as I mentioned, we all have multiple personalities. Children have multiple personalities. Adults have multiple personalities. There's a version of you that loves to exercise. The problem is that version of you is very distant right now, is off somewhere in some other on some other continent. And what you have to do is summon that person, summon the version of yourself that loves to exercise. As long as that person who loves to exercise seems and feels distant, you're not identifying with exercise. You're feeling like that's something that I don't really like to do. I feel emotionally disengaged and detached. I'm not emotionally aroused by it. And it may be a very quick thing to simply recall the experience the last time you exercised. Really take a moment. It could take 5 seconds maybe to really put yourself in that picture and recall what it was like, recall the feelings. That's oftentimes a great way to motivate yourself. As long as it seems distant, you're not going to feel very motivated about it. And then from a therapeutic standpoint, this can all have tremendous relevance in terms of phobias and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Because what happens very often in the case of a phobia or a post-traumatic stress disorder is a person has experienced something in their life. It may have been mere moments in one day, 14, 15 or more years ago. It was years ago. And unlike other memories that they have, this particular memory has not properly moved to the part of the brain where we put past memories. It actually has remained lodged in a different part of the brain. And what happens as a result is this person revisits this frightening or emotionally unpleasant experience again and again and again and again. So that maybe something else that happened on that same day, if they even remember it at all, it feels and it seems much more like a distant experience. It's in the past. It's something that happened years ago. But this other memory is experienced almost like an ongoing event in my life. It keeps coming back. I keep revisiting it. And in the course of therapy with this person, actually this is one thing that needs to happen. They actually need to become more dissociated from that memory. It's not that we want them to expunge the memory altogether. We don't want to erase it from their memory. We simply want them to feel like there's more distance between themselves and that memory. And actually what happens is then the memory actually moves into the appropriate part of the brain then with all those other past memories. And it starts to seem much more like something that happened in the past. Maybe it's something that happened when I was younger, but I'm not really the same person that I was then. So again, we have those 3 Ds again. Disidentification. I don't really identify too much with the person I was then, because after all, I was, let's say, 7 years old. I'm not 7 years old anymore, so I don't really identify with that the way I did before. And again, remember, degrees. There are always degrees of this. I know it happened to me or it happened in my life, but again, it's that feeling of like, that isn't really me now. The detachment, it doesn't have the same emotional impact that it once did. Distance, it feels distant. And again, it's interesting how certain things that happened, let's say 10 years ago in your life, can seem very remote and very distant, and yet other things, they don't seem to have that same feeling of distance to us. So that's often a very urgent thing when somebody is experiencing phobias and PTSD, to get them to be able to see. And there are absolutely techniques that one can use to make this happen, oftentimes very, very quickly. In neuro-linguistic programming, for example, there's a technique of having a person actually recall either the initial experience, or in some cases they might not be able to remember the initial experience. It might have happened when they were very, very young, but to recall some instance of this kind of fear coming back. And they actually envision themselves in a movie theater, watching the event on a screen. So what we're actually doing is we're taking the person out of the picture. It's not a first-person kind of experience. It's seen up on a movie screen. And then we tell them you have a control in your hand and you can adjust the size of the picture. Make it smaller. See what it's like when you make it smaller. You can change the color tint. You can actually turn it to black and white. Again, it's actually telling the brain, so to speak, to view this event now from much more of a third-person perspective. And then we go even further than that, and we'll say, now imagine yourself floating to the ceiling, and you can actually look down and see yourself watching this. So you're even more removed from it now. And now float all the way to the back of the theater and view that theater now. You see the theater and you see the screen and you see yourself watching it. And incredibly, I mean, it might sound crazy, but this actually often helps people who have phobias and PTSD. It might not cure them completely the first time, but oftentimes people do report a quite significant lessening of that repeated fear experience. It's very interesting, of course, how the brain works and how memories work and how certain things can seem a certain way to us in one moment, and then the next moment you almost say, why did that bother me so much? Why did that seem to be so significant? You've now achieved that dissociation. And then, of course, association can also be very helpful. Like I said, at times we want to associate ourselves more. For instance, with success. The problem with a lot of people is they don't see themselves as successful. They don't really believe that could ever be me. They know people are successful in the world, but that's not really me, And to help a person to see, yes, that is me. That certainly can be me. That's very important. So that's association and dissociation. And by the way, the 3 Ds As far as I know, those are mine. I came up with those. You're welcome to use them, but if you ever hear anybody talking about the 3 Ds of dissociation, you know where they came from. Anyway, those are my thoughts. You can share your own thoughts, and I'll talk to you later.